Okay, the last set of problems, one is a word problem. They'll give you two functions. This one says that C is the cost of printing a textbook in terms of the number of pages, and P is the price of the textbook, like what they're going to sell the book for in terms of the pages. So this just asks you to find P minus C. So you're going to take P, which is 0.05x squared plus 20, and you're going to subtract C, which is 0.2x squared plus 10. So all you're doing is subtracting those. Just be careful that you're subtracting both of those. So when you take 0.05 and subtract a 0.2, you get negative 0.15x squared, and then 20 minus 10 is a plus 10. So that's all that piece is asking for, is for you to subtract them. Now it might say to multiply them, it might say to subtract, it might say to add. Just look to see what it says to do. I needed to take P minus C. Then the second question is ask you, excuse me, what does it mean? So if you take P, if you take the selling price, you subtract the cost of what it costs to make it, what are you left with? Well, in anything, if you take the selling price and you subtract the cost it was to make it, you're really looking at the profit. You're looking at the profit as a function of how many pages. So that kind of becomes important that you say that piece. You know, basically knowing that it's the profit is the big thing. But what that means is, like, if I told you there's 100 pages, to find the profit, you take negative 0.15 times 100 squared plus 10. That would tell you your profit. If I knew there were 300 pages, I'd take negative 0.15 times 300 squared plus 10. That would tell me the profit. Okay, so that's really the basic part, is that you know it's the profit. All right, and then 18 and 19 are being able to find an inverse. So remember, to find an inverse, you switch the x and the y. So this becomes the x and 3y minus 2. So that's really what an inverse is, but now you have to solve for y. So with this one, we need to add 2 to both sides, and then we need to divide by 3. And so really my inverse is x plus 3, or x plus 2 over 3. So take the time to switch the x and the y and then solve that equation for y. Some of you were trying to do that without showing work, and then you were messing up the order. All right, so you switch the x and the y, solve for y. That's the inverse. Then it says you have to graph both. So you can use your graphing calculator. You can put that in your y equals and come up with some points. You do have to kind of specifically give me some points. So with the first one, I should be able to do that without using my graphing calculator. I know the y-intercept is at negative 2, and there's a slope of 3. So if I go up 1, 2, 3, I go over 1. If I go up 1, 2, 3, I go over 1. So when I graph that line, I should have some ordered pairs. So this was at 0, negative 2. So now I should have the ordered pair switched. The inverse should be at negative 2, 0. So really, you don't have to even put that in your graphing calculator. If you've got these points, just switch the x and the y, and you can graph it. So instead of 0, negative 2, it's negative 2, 0. When I went up 3 and over 1, I was at 1, 1. So when I switch that, I'm still at 1, 1. And that's really enough points to graph it. Or I can say when I went, from there went rise of 3 and over 1, that point was at 2, comma, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. 2, 4. So now that becomes 4, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So you can use your graphing calculator. Once you have some points on the first line of f of x, you really don't have to graph g of x on your calculator. You can just switch those ordered pairs. Okay? So you graph the first line. You can use your graphing calculator if you have to. Just switch the ordered pairs, flip the x and the y to find g of x. Just find the equation of g of x, you switch the x and the y, and solve for y. So with 19, I'm going to switch the x and the y, and I have to solve that for y. So I'm going to first subtract 4. And now again, we talked about it before, to undo a cubed root, we have to cube both sides. Now what I would do is I would just leave it as a cube. Don't try to FOIL all of that out, because that means you have to take x minus 4 times x minus 4, get an answer to that, and multiply it by x minus 4. So it's really just as easy to say, over here I get y, and here I'm just going to leave it as x minus 4 cubed. Okay, so you don't have to cube that out. All right, now to graph it, again, you may want to use your graphing calculator. So maybe I should talk about your graphing calculator with this one. So let's say I want to graph, you can graph either one. I'll graph the original one. I'm going to do the cubed root, so I go to math. Cubed root is there of x. Arrow over, so you're out of that, and put plus 4. So make sure the plus 4 is not underneath the cubed root. So when you do zoom 6, your standard window, you should see it comes like this. It has a little curly point. It's called a point of inflection, and then it goes this way. It's going to go on forever. Domain is all reals. Range is all reals. So if you trace, you should see that it got moved up 4. And that makes sense. From this equation, you had the cubed root of x, but then you added 4 to it. So the y value becomes at 0, 4 is that starting point. So when we graph that, we're going to graph 0, 4. Now, you should know that if you go over 1, you go up 1 to get to your next points, and over 1, down 1 to get to these points. But if you don't know that, use your calculator. You can go to table, and we'll say we want to start the table. I'm going to start the table at 0 and go by 1. So I went to table set. That's above the window. And I'm going to start at 0 and go by 1s. So now I go to table. I see I have 0, 4. I have 1, 5. I can go here, negative 1, 3. So you can graph those 3 points would be enough to see what it looks like. And again, if you want to then, you can just take these ordered pairs and flip them. So if you go 3, negative 1, 3, negative 1 instead of negative 1, 3, that's what this point becomes. Instead of 0, 4, it becomes 4, 0. And instead of 1, 4, it becomes 4, 1. No, 4, 1, 5. I guess that was 1, 5. So 5, 1. And so when I try to graph that function, then it's going to look like this. So it's got to come up and go that direction. So it's just taking, and you may want to get another point. Like if you use your table, another point you should find is at 8, 6. So I mean, with the original problem, you can keep going to find another integer. So 8, 6, on the inverse it becomes 6, 8. So if you aren't quite sure what it looks like with just those 3 points, you may want to find another point, or even just looking at the graph, I know what that one looks like. I could put g of x in my calculator as well, if you wanted to see what that looked like. So you always have the option of looking at your calculator, but do make sure on the test that I see those points. Now I can tell because of the tick marks where they're at, but it might even be better to even label those points. So you make sure that I know that you have taken those points and you switch the x and the y around. Okay, so with the graphing ones, you have to be able to find the inverse, you have to be able to graph the original function, and then you have to be able to graph the inverse. You can use your graphing calculators to find points. I do need to see specific points that you have graphed before you do that. A line, you really only need 2 points. With all of these other ones, you need at least 3 points to show me what's going on. Okay, so that's the graphing.